Alice Mary Victoria Augusta Pauline was born on the 25th of February 1883 at Windsor Castle. From that very moment, her life seemed woven into the grand currents of history. She was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, born at a time when the British Empire stood at the height of its power. No one could have imagined then that this child would live for nearly a century, becoming the last surviving link between the Victorian age and the modern world. Her long life made her a quiet witness to profound transformation. She saw empires rise and fall, monarchies collapse, and new political orders take shape. While thrones disappeared and dynasties fractured around her, Alice remained a constant presence within the British royal family. Her bearing was marked by dignity, her manner both noble and approachable. From an early age, she developed a strong sense of duty and an unwavering commitment to responsibility toward crown and country. Yet, behind the traditions and ceremony lay a life shaped by personal loss, inner conflict, and difficult choices. Alice grew up in a world where individual happiness often yielded to dynastic expectation. Her story is therefore more than the biography of a princess. It is the portrait of a woman who learned to endure the weight of history without losing herself in it. With her birth began a journey that would carry her through nearly every defining chapter of the 20th century. Alice's early childhood was shaped by an event that would cast a long shadow over her life: sudden loss. Barely 14 months old, she experienced her first profound tragedy. Her father, Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, died in March 1884 as a result of hemophilia, a hereditary illness that had long afflicted his health. For Alice, he became more an absence than a memory, a paternal figure reconstructed through portraits, stories, and the quiet grief of her mother. His death left behind not only a young widow, but two small children who would grow up without a father's protection. Her mother withdrew with Alice and her younger brother to Claremont House, where their childhood unfolded in relative calm. The estate offered shelter and stability, yet it could not fully shield them from the vulnerability that had already entered their lives. Even within this protected environment, moments of disturbance intruded. On one occasion, intruders reached as far as Alice's bedroom. The incident frightened the young princess, but her mother softened the memory with reassurance, turning alarm into a gentler story. It was an early lesson in how fear and comfort can exist side by side. Despite her father's absence, Alice was not isolated from the wider royal circle. Her grandmother, Queen Victoria, showed particular affection toward the children of her youngest son. In that closeness to the aging sovereign, Alice developed an early awareness of her lineage and the expectations attached to her name. Duty was not something she would learn later in life. It was woven into her upbringing from the very beginning. Alice's transition from childhood to adulthood unfolded not in obscurity, but beneath the bright light of public ceremony. As a young girl, she took part in some of the most significant events of the late Victorian era. The Diamond Jubilee of 1897 left a particularly lasting impression. Riding in a carriage through the streets of London, surrounded by cheering crowds and elaborate pageantry, she witnessed firsthand the scale and symbolism of imperial power. For Alice, monarchy was never an abstract concept. It was a lived reality, defined by ritual, expectation, and visibility. Her closeness to Queen Victoria reinforced her place within the royal structure. When the Queen personally attended her confirmation, it carried meaning beyond the religious rite itself. It signaled recognition, continuity, and belonging. Alice was part of the generation that would carry the legacy of the 19th century into an uncertain future. At the same time, she learned to navigate a world in which every gesture was observed and every appearance carried weight. The death of Queen Victoria in 1901 marked the end of an era. For Alice, it meant not only the loss of a beloved grandmother, but the beginning of a new chapter under a different monarch. Court life evolved, and with it, her own role within it. Visits to European relatives broadened her perspective, exposing her to courts where tradition and modern change coexisted in delicate balance. These formative years shaped Alice into a woman acutely aware of her position, yet determined not to be entirely defined by it. She learned to balance personal conviction with public duty, a skill that would soon be tested in ways no one could have foreseen. The defining turning point in Alice's personal life came shortly before her 21st birthday. On the 10th of February 1904, she married Prince Alexander of Teck in St. George's Chapel at Windsor. The ceremony unfolded with full royal splendor, reflecting the expectations placed upon a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Yet beyond the grandeur, the marriage marked the beginning of a partnership built on shared duty and mutual understanding. In Alexander, Alice found a companion who respected both her independence and her deep sense of responsibility. After the wedding, her life shifted toward family. The couple established their home in London, and in the years that followed, 3 children were born. For a time, Alice appeared to achieve a rare equilibrium between personal fulfillment and public obligation. She carried out charitable engagements with quiet consistency and became known for her dignified presence within Edwardian society. Her composure, intelligence, and steady character earned her respect across court circles. That balance, however, proved fragile. The death of her youngest child, who lived only a few months, struck Alice and her husband with devastating force. It was a reminder that even royal privilege offered no protection from the most intimate forms of grief. Rather than retreat from public life, Alice responded with restraint and renewed dedication. She focused her energy on her surviving children and on the responsibilities that accompanied her position. Outwardly, she remained poised and controlled. Inwardly, she carried the quiet endurance of a woman who understood that personal sorrow must often be borne without spectacle. This strength would soon be called upon again, as the stability of Europe itself began to fracture under the strain of war. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 reshaped Alice's world in ways both public and deeply personal. The intricate web of kinship that had long connected Europe's royal houses suddenly became a source of tension and division. As a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, Alice was related to many reigning dynasties across the continent. Within weeks, cousins and relatives found themselves on opposing sides of a conflict that would redefine the political landscape of Europe. For Alice, loyalty was no longer a ceremonial formality. It became a conscious and painful alignment. Most difficult of all was the position of her only brother. Raised and educated in Germany, he had assumed a prominent role there and, with the outbreak of war, served the German cause. Alice, by contrast, stood firmly with Britain. What had once been a shared childhood in England now seemed overshadowed by political reality. The emotional distance created by war was not merely symbolic, it carried consequences that would endure long after the fighting ceased. When the war ended, the collapse of old regimes brought further upheaval. Her brother lost his position, and in Britain, he was stripped of his titles for having served the opposing side. For Alice, this was a moment of silent anguish. She felt the strain between familial loyalty and national duty, yet she understood that her position left no room for ambiguity. Publicly, she upheld the stance of the British royal family. Privately, the cost was profound. The war dismantled more than empires. It fractured relationships and erased the certainties of Alice's youth. In response, she did not retreat. Instead, she embraced her role with greater resolve, determined to embody stability in an era defined by rupture. Through composure and unwavering commitment, she became a figure of continuity at a time when continuity itself seemed uncertain. The years of war did not only redraw borders, they reshaped the identity of the British monarchy itself. Amid growing public hostility toward anything associated with Germany, King George V made a decisive move to safeguard the institution. Members of the royal family who bore German titles were required to relinquish them and redefine their public identity. For Alice and her husband, this decision marked a significant turning point. Prince Alexander of Teck renounced his German title and adopted an anglicized surname. In return, he was granted a British peerage, becoming the Earl of Athlone. Alice retained her status as a princess of the United Kingdom, yet her public designation changed. The shift was not merely symbolic. It represented a deliberate distancing from former affiliations and a clear affirmation of British loyalty during a time of national sensitivity. Their children were likewise integrated fully into the British aristocratic structure, leaving behind titles that might invite suspicion. For Alice, the transition carried emotional complexity. Her life had been shaped by close connections to European relatives, and now that shared royal network had been permanently altered. Yet, she adapted without hesitation. Alice understood that the survival of the monarchy depended on responsiveness to public sentiment. By embracing the change with composure, she helped personify a redefined royal identity grounded less in continental lineage and more in visible service and national solidarity. In the years following the First World War, the center of Alice's life gradually extended beyond Britain. When her husband accepted a senior appointment within the empire, she accompanied him abroad, entering a new chapter far removed from the familiar courts of Europe. The change was more than geographic. It required adaptability, cultural awareness, and a willingness to represent the crown in environments shaped by different histories and expectations. Alice embraced the role with energy. She traveled widely, attended official engagements, and sought genuine contact with the communities she encountered. Rather than limiting herself to ceremonial appearances, she took interest in social initiatives and charitable causes, especially those involving education and welfare. Her approach combined dignity with approachability, reinforcing the image of a monarchy attentive to the wider world it governed. Yet even during this period of expanded responsibility, personal tragedy returned. The death of her son, still young and full of promise, reopened wounds that traced back to her own childhood. The hereditary illness that had claimed her father resurfaced within the next generation, reminding Alice that history could repeat itself within a single family. The loss was deeply personal, linking past sorrow to present reality. After a period of withdrawal, she resumed her public duties with quiet determination. Those around her observed the same composed exterior, yet beneath it lay the resilience of someone who had learned to carry grief without surrendering purpose. Her strength during this time would prepare her for another global crisis that would soon demand her presence once more on the international stage. When war returned to Europe in 1939, Alice was no longer a young princess, but an experienced and seasoned figure within the royal family. Yet once again, she placed herself at the service of the crown. During one of the most critical moments of the conflict, her husband was appointed to a position of exceptional importance overseas, and Alice accompanied him. The residence that became their home during these years evolved into a vital center of Allied cooperation. In this new setting, Alice's role extended far beyond ceremonial duties. She understood that morale and visible leadership were essential in wartime. She visited military hospitals, supported organizations dedicated to women's service, and lent her patronage to initiatives assisting those affected by the conflict. Her calm authority and personal warmth left a lasting impression on soldiers, volunteers, and civilians alike. She represented continuity at a time when the world seemed suspended between uncertainty and resolve. Their residence also welcomed prominent Allied leaders and representatives of governments in exile. Alice proved to be an attentive and perceptive hostess, capable of balancing diplomatic sensitivity with natural ease. Though she never sought political influence, her presence contributed to an atmosphere of unity and shared purpose. After the war, she made one final effort to preserve fragile family ties that had been strained by political allegiances. The outcome did not bring reconciliation, underscoring the limits of personal intervention in a transformed Europe. Still, Alice returned to her responsibilities with the same steadiness that had defined her life. With the end of the conflict, another chapter closed, and Alice entered the final phase of a life already intertwined with the defining events of the century. After the war, Alice returned permanently to England. The country she came back to was profoundly different from the one into which she had been born. The empire had changed, society had evolved, and a new generation now stood at the forefront of public life. Yet, even in advanced age, Alice did not withdraw from service. She accepted positions connected to higher education and lent her experience to institutions that aimed to shape future leaders across the Commonwealth. In doing so, she demonstrated that royal duty could extend beyond ceremony into intellectual and cultural life. The death of her husband marked a deeply personal turning point. After decades of shared responsibility, she continued alone, sustained by family and by the quiet discipline that had long defined her character. She remained a respected presence within the royal circle until the end. When Alice died at the age of 97, her passing symbolized more than the end of a long life. It marked the closing of a living bridge to the Victorian era. Through upheaval and transformation, she had embodied continuity, restraint, and unwavering dedication to duty.